It's 4 p.m. and we're bringing you the developing news and the stories behind the headlines. This is Storycon. I'm Patrick Paez. Some stories we're watching this Monday, June 17. The Armed Forces of the Philippines says they will not dignify the, quote, deceptive and misleading claims of China. Beijing's Coast Guard said that a Filipino vessel intentionally sailed too close to one Chinese ship and bumped it. The collision supposedly happened near Ayungin Shoal earlier today. In Davao, Police Brigadier General Nicolas Torre III has formally assumed as the region's police director. He says the arrest of fugitive religious leader Apollo Quiboloy is not a top priority. Torre's predecessor, Brigadier General Aligre Martinez, was relieved on the supposed ground that of certain lapses in the raids on Quiboloy's properties. And the Maritime Industry Authority reports that its web-based systems were hit by a cyber attack yesterday, but Marina assures they are working to mitigate the data breach. The agency is targeting system restoration by tomorrow. And then there were two joining me today. Storycon's resident political pundit, Ronald Llamas. Ami is not joining, won't be around for us with us for the rest of the week. Yeah. She is busy with other endeavors. I think that are long due vacation maybe for Ami, no? Yeah, mahirap din magsarado ng dyaryo araw-araw, Ronald eh. Oh. Diba? Sabi nila as an editor-in-chief, para kang nanganganak. Araw-araw, yung dyaryo.
Taka 24/7 yan. No,
yes.
Tuloy-tuloy yan.
Tuloy-tuloy yan. And she's been doing it for how many years? Ano? Okay, Ronald, first thing, itong latest incident sa Ayungin Shoal. I wonder why there's no a definite word from the Philippine side about that incident, that collision incident.
I was also waiting for that. Ito, bahagi pa rin ito ng scaling up after the Shangri-La Forum.
Right.
Parang para sa China ay mahalaga yung Shangri-La Forum. No, kaya hindi ako magugulat na magpapatuloy ito yung scaling up na ito. Last Sunday kasi sinimulan o at least nag-threaten na simulan yung pag-arrest ng mga trespassers sa ating sariling West Philippine Sea ng China. Ang tingin ko mas warning rather than an actual threat.
Why Shangri-La Forum or the Shangri-La Dialogue? Is it because of the speech of the president?
Yes.
I would imagine that it was even before the speech. I was thinking more like yung Christmas convoy. 'Di ba? Kasi doon pinakita ng Philippine side yung strategy nila of measured transparency, meaning to say exposing the bully tactics of China by, in a way bullying a civilian convoy delivering supplies, no? I thought that was the turning point in China's aggressive moves.
Yung mga convoy na yan, hindi alam ng China kung ano gagawin.
Right.
Mas sanay sila dun sa ating confrontation with our Navy and our Coast Guard. So medyo na off-balance sila dyan, medyo asymmetrical. Pero in terms of real anger, galit sila dun sa Shangri-La Forum dahil una, it was a forum na first time isang Philippine president ay nagsalita. So lahat nakikinig doon. Ikalawa ay meron siyang Rubicon speech na crossing the Rubicon. Kung may isa man lang na Pilipino na namatay na hindi military personnel, na hindi nakasakay sa isang military vessel, no, that's tantamount to war. No? Hindi naman niya sinabi na i-invoke yung Mutual Defense Treaty dahil mahirap kung civilian. Pero ibig sabihin dyan, parang kinokol niya ang China. Na, huwag niyo kami subukan. Yung ikatlo ay yung kanyang legal framework. This was the first time a president talked about the Paris and the Washington Treaty as a consummation nung Paris Treaty. No? Kaya yung legal na yan ay in a way parang game changer. Na yung Baho de Masinloc sa amin, no? Yung nasa EEZ sa amin yan, no? Panyan, significantly dagdag do sa ating UNCLOS victory.
He's basically saying that Baho de Masinloc, let's just talk about Baho de Masinloc, specifically, no? The official Philippine position right now is that it's part of our EEZ.
And our continental shelf.
In our continental shelf. But when
Mismo
he
yung
invoked the
kanya-
Paris Treaty and the Washington Treaty, he is in effect saying it's territory.
Yes.
Because based on the Washington Treaty,
May sariling territorial dahil
Yes.
above sea level yung
not only that Bao Masinloc was part of the Philippine archipelago during the Spanish colonial period.
and during the transfer to the Americas.
Yes, and that those territorial rights were passed on to the United States. So he's basically saying it's not just EEZ. So he's making a claim for territorial.
Yes.
Territorial claim on Bao
Yes, kaya nga
Masinloc.
sinabi ko na game changer. Dahil even yung mga legal luminaries ng Pilipinas ay hindi pumunta sa ganyang level. Mismo halimbawa si former Solicitor General Estelito Mendoza, si present Presidential Legal Advisor Enrile, at kahit mga legal luminaries like Father Bernas, no, ay hindi pumasok diyan.
Okay, I'm wondering lang, Ronald, whether that mention of Paris Treaty in the Shangri-La Dialogue speech of the President, was that by happenstance or by coincidence? Kasi, the significance of that did not escape you or former Justice Antonio Carpio, who explained to us in detail what the implications of the Paris Treaty has. Pero parang walang follow-up on the part of the administration. Walang clarification. It was mentioned in the speech, pero parang walang push.
Tingin ko binabalanse ng presidente yung sinabi niya. Kumbaga, this is our term of reference. No, nabanggit ko na. Hindi ko na yung mababawi. No? Sinabi ko na yung aming terms of reference dito sa ating engagement. Pero, I won't pour fuel in the fire.
Muna.
So, nasabi ko na, okay na yan. Pero hindi ko na yan i-scale up muna. No? Ang nag-scale up ay yung China. Lalo na, during the Shangri-La Forum, binanatan nila si BBM, nung isang People's Liberation Army General. One-star general. Bumanat doon, no?
Okay. I'd just like to read that portion in the President's keynote speech about the Paris Treaty for proper context. So the President said, the Treaty of Paris between the United States and Spain crystallized our islands into a cohesive home. So ito yung basis.
Yung archipelago
natin. The Treaty of Washington, and he followed up with the Treaty of Washington, which not a lot of people know about, no? Na the Treaty of Washington was an addendum or some sorts to the Treaty of Paris.
Yes, dahil hindi lahat sinama ng Spain dun sa Paris Treaty. May mga naiwan.
May mga naiwan. Now, the Treaty of Washington includes everything that Spain owned in this part of the
Bao de Masinloc,
South Pacific. No? Yeah. Okay. So, the Treaty of Washington clarified. So, very important yung pagkakagamit ng salita. Clarified kasi may mga parts nga ng territory na hindi nasama sa treaty, sa first treaty. Clarified the extent of our sovereignty and patrimony in the lines set by international powers.
Yes. International binding yan. Sabihin kasi ng iba, teka, di ba mga colonizers yung gumawa niyan? Yes. Pero yung colonizers namin, yun yung gumawa ng limits ng bansa. Spain and then the Americans. Exactly, they are colonizers. But yung kanilang isinet up na basis is binding.
Okay.
Dahil kahit naman yung mga bansa like Indonesia, Dutch colony yan eh. No? Like Malaysia, British naman yan, etc. Yun yung nag-define.
Nabuo ang Indonesian archipelago, for example, because of the lines set by the Dutch. By the Dutch
and then Malaysia naman, the British. Siyempre, may mga overlap yan. Kaya nga meron tayong mga contested territorial claims. Pero iba kasi yung maritime claims. No? Magkaiba yun. Yung maritime, yun yung EEZ. Na suportado tayo ng Malaysia, Brunei, Vietnam, at saka Indonesia.
Okay. Ronald, when we had Justice Carpio here, okay, because I had to go back to that interview, listen to it again in the recordings, no, para lang maintindihan. Now, according to Justice Carpio, Paris Treaty itself, even China invoked Paris Treaty and the Washington Treaty in its position paper that was submitted to the Hague Tribunal hearing.
Yes. Without realizing it.
Without realizing. Sabi nga ni Justice Carpio, parang they did not read it. Kasi ang sinasabi dun sa Washington Treaty kasama
ang Scarborough
at saka
ang
Spratlys.
Spratlys.
So, Philippine Archipelago.
Kaya kasi sinasabi niya, anong tawag dyan sa high school? Bali todo. Wala nang bawian.
Yun. Touch move.
Touch move.
Touch move. Oo. So, very interesting.
Nasa record na ng conclusion eh.
Yeah. So, very interesting from a legal and juridical point of view. No? Not even historical. No? Na itong Paris Treaty na ito. But doesn't it confuse also at the same time, confuse the position of the Philippines? Ano ba talaga? Paris Treaty ba talaga or UNCLOS ang gagamitin
natin?
natin?
Not necessarily. Dahil it was there eh. It was part of our history. It was part of our, sabi ni Justice Carpio, factual, historical, no? And legal claims natin. No? Kaya ang mahalaga lang, kailangan ipaliwanag dahil yung iba kasi medyo itong mga legal luminaries na confused. Kaya nga, hindi ko alam ngayon kung ano sasabihin ni Chief Presidential Legal Advisor Enrile dahil kinontra ng presidente yung kanyang posisyon na hindi, wala yung Washington Treaty.
But I think the point of, let's say, sabihin na natin, unang binanggit si former Solicitor General Estelito Mendoza and also then Defense Secretary Juan Ponce Enrile, they wanted to, they were insisting on invoking the presidential decree, right?
Yeah.
That that sort of made the Philippine claim on the Spratly Islands. I think it was because of parang they wanted the claim on the Spratlys to be a legacy of the Marcos government.
Yeah.
Parang gano'n. Na
Saka,
it was Marcos who did it.
Yeah. At saka nung panahon kasi na yun, hindi pa highlighted, hindi pa scaled up yung 9-dash line ng China. Kumbaga hindi pa yung pinag-uusapan masyado. Bagamat nandun yun, hindi pinupush pa ng China. Pinush ng China yan nung panahon ni Aquino, di ba? Tapos pinush din nila nung panahon ni Digong. So ngayon talaga naging kwanyan. Naging very significant. Kaya in-engage natin sila by filing a case in UNCLOS. No?
Okay, before we go deeper into this rabbit hole, let's bring in another guest for today. Another resource we have with us joining again, Presidential Anti-Organized Crime Commission Chief Undersecretary Gilbert Cruz. Usec Cruz, welcome back to the Storycon.
Yes, good afternoon, Patrick and Sir Ronald. Good afternoon.
Kamusta, Usec? Kamusta na yung proposal ko na super body? Pinag-uusapan na ba?
Opo, actually, pangatlo na po kayo sa nagsuggest yan, sir. Sa tingin ko, yan kasi sir yung talagang magandang gawin natin since nakikita na po natin yung laki po ng problema. I think it's about time to think of creating a super body para just to address this problem, sir.
Alam mo ba yun? Yung super body na sinuggest ko na parang ICAC sa Hong Kong. Above siya dun sa mga ibang departamento para meron siyang bite, meron siyang power.
In dealing with these POGOs.
Yeah, in dealing with the POGOs. Dahil maraming enablers eh. Bureau of Immigration, mismo sa kapulisan.
Local police, right.
Mismo sa local government, no? Etc. So, kailangan mo ng super body na may superpowers. Parang Marvel superheroes.
Usec, on a slightly different note, etong discovery ng mga papers pertaining to a former executive assistant of Secretary Harry Roque. Curious lang kami, Usec, anong ginagawa nito dyan within the POGO complex? In Porac, I understand?
Yeah. Doon ba siya nakatira, Usec?
Yun po ang explanation ni dating spokes po ng dating administrasyon. And sabi niya po, nakitira daw since doon po sa lugar yung tao at doon siya nag-aaral. Parang doon daw po tumira for a while. Opo, dahil nag-aaral nga po doon sa Clark. So, yun ang explanation niya.
So, this POGO complex takes in visitors and residents or renters?
And government officials.
Yun kasi yung first time na nakarinig po tayo. But normally po, pag nakakapasok po tayo, dahil may nirate po tayo mga POGO hub, normally, ang mga nandun po, mga nagtatrabaho, like
right.
kung Pilipino ka ho, it's either you work as sa maintenance or
Right.
sa household help or doon ka po sa kitchen. And kung ikaw naman ay foreign national, normally doon ka po sa POGO hub, sa illegal POGO hub, kung scamming operations nila, yung actual operation ng online illegal gambling, and other administrative matters. But yun lang, doon ko lang narinig na yung sinasabi pong tao, pinatira raw po doon dahil yun po nag-aaral daw po doon sa area, sa malapit sa area.
Saka Usec, hindi to simpleng government official. This is an executive assistant level 3 ng isang spokesperson ng presidente. No? So hindi siya ganun kasimple.
Yes, tama po.
So do we know,
Yes, opo.
Usec, of any other individual who was accorded or had a similar situation as the executive assistant of Secretary Harry Roque na pinayagan siyang rumenta dyan o makidor dyan sa POGO Hub?
May renta ba? Parang
Whatever arrangement that is, pinayagan umupa o magbayad o pinatira ng libre. May mga iba bang ganung kaso din, Usec? O siya lang
Yun po
ang
yung
natatangin?
tinitignan natin. Actually, may mga dokumento po tayong na-recover during the search. And tinitignan pa po natin kung may similar. But sa ngayon ho, yan lang muna talaga yung nakita natin doon po sa POGO Hub dyan po sa Porac.
Okay, but can you say na wala no such thing as a dormitory for students dyan sa within the POGO complex? Wala pong ganun.
Wala po kasi they're doing illegal things inside. So, yun nga ho, minsan pumasok po yung Bureau of Fire po natin to make their inspection. Hindi ho sila pinapasok at pinag-inspect doon sa fire safety. Kasi nga ho, ayaw nilang makapasok yung mga tao na makakaalam kung ano ho yung ginagawa sa loob. So, they are very secretive, very careful doon sa mga tao pumapasok sa loob.
And yet this student, this former executive assistant was allowed, I guess, allowed to live inside the complex.
Saka Usec, aksidente yung pagkakakita dyan, di ba? Aksidente lang na nakita niyo yung papeles. Oo.
Apo, aksidente po yan, aksidente.
Wala namang dormitory dyan para sa mga beauty contestants sa Mr. Supranational.
Ang dorm po dito is, karamihan po, mga dorm po na ginagamit ng mga mag-illegal po, yung mga gumagawa po ng scamming dito sa POGO Hub na ito.
So usually, POGO workers, those are involved with the operations.
Yes, sir. Illegal POGO workers. Okay.
Hindi beauty contestant.
Okay. Body Mr. Supranational. Okay. You said medyo every few days, there's something new or fascinating coming out of this POGO complex, in Porac. Tapos na ba yung pag-i-inspect nyo or matagal-tagal pa? Marami pang hindi nakikita?
As far as the search po, sir, tapos na po yung search natin. Kasi 10 days lang po, talagang hinabol po natin yung 10 days. So, we don't need to extend the search at magre-record pa po kami kay Judge for additional days. Naayos naman po na gamit po namin yung 10 days and tapos na po. And ang ginagawa na lang po namin is the preparation for the filing of case. Dito po sa mga management, sa mga involved po doon sa mga human trafficking and other cases po na hinahanda po namin laban sa kanila.
Usec, any new discovery and what cases are you looking at?
Nakita na po namin yung human trafficking case na ipapile namin. And there were names na naglabasan po, but I think mag-i-open na lang po namin siguro ito pa after na na-file na po namin yung case.
Usec, nung ni-raid kasi yung mga POGO hubs na yan, parang wala yung mga nagpapatakbo. Wala yung mga leaders, wala yung mga managers. May possibility ba na may nagtimbre sa kanila? Mula sa gobyerno?
Alam mo, Sir Ronald, nung first application po namin yung search warrant was June 4. And then, nung nandun pa lang po sa korte yung mga tao natin yung nag-a-apply yung search warrant, nabalitaan namin na nagtatakbuhan na po. Kasi we're expecting about 2,000 o 1,000 plus na mga illegal POGO workers sa loob. So, napatakbo po kami at butin lang may inabot pa kami. And then, na-delay po kami ng 2 days kasi na-deny po yung first search warrant namin. Nagkaroon po ng denial, although na-approve na po nung una. And then we need to apply for a second search warrant sa ibang court po na na-approve naman po. So yun po ang ginagamit namin ngayon, yung warrant po na in-issue ni Judge Robert Alexander Malik, the Executive Judge of San Fernando, Pampanga. So buti na lang po, may mga inabot pa po kami na kulang na 200 na illegal POGO workers. And may mga managers po kami nakuha, may mga torturers po kami nakuha, those who are in charge of inflicting harm dun sa mga POGO workers. And may mga victims naman po kaming na-rescue. So, I think may tight case din po kami dito sa management po ng POGO na ito sa Porac.
Pero Usec, ang sabi nyo, mga inaasahan nyo, more than 2,000. Ang inabutan nyo, 200.
Opo.
So that's less than 10%.
Opo.
So yung 90%
Yes, sir.
nakawala.
Opo. Yun po ang...
Yusek, when you say names in connection with this POGO in Porac, what are these names? Are these names of Filipinos that you're looking at? Names of prominent people that you're looking at? And what sort of involvement or culpability do they have na they're now subject of investigation?
May mga names po tayo na I can say na familiar na po sa pandinig natin. And yung mga chains po ng mga Chinese nationals po na those who are in charge with the pagpatakbo po ng illegal POGO hub na to. And yung mga link po na ginagawa natin, masasabi po natin na yung magkakabit po yung mga illegal POGO hub, dyan po sa area ng Luzon na yan.
Usec, nakausap namin si PAGCOR Chair Altenco last week. Ang sabi niya, 40 plus lang yung legal dun sa mga POGO at almost 300 yung illegal. Ito bang mga 300 na ito, may mapping na kayo at may plano ba kayong silipin itong mga almost 300 na allegedly illegal POGO katulad dyan sa Porac at saka sa Bamban?
Yung 300 po na yon, Sir Ronald, pala po yan sa buong Pilipinas.
Yes,
We are
yes.
looking at pinakamababa dito is 300 to 2,000 hanggang 5,000 POGO workers. Opo. And these are no ordinary houses, kasi if you will look at yung nakita po natin sa Banban and then yung nakuha po natin sa Porac, ganun po ang mga haharapin natin. So, talagang kung sa silip na meron po tayong mga record na dyan sa 300 na yan. Alam na po natin kung nasaan yan. Alam na po natin na mga illegal po yung mga ginagawa nila. And alam po natin na wala na rin po sila mga permits. But namimili lang tayo talaga, Sir Ronald, nung uunahin natin. Like, pag meron pong mga video na pinapadala sa amin, like yan sa Porac, 3 video po yung tinanggap natin dyan na torture activities po na ginagawa po sa The same thing din po sa Banban, nakakuha po tayo ng video galing naman po sa Vietnam Embassy. And yun yung mga dahilan kung bakit po nare-raid natin yan. And some POGOs po na sinasabi nyo na part po ng 300 na yan. May mga videos na rin po kami. And, but kagaya ng sinabi ko, sir, sa dami nila at sa laki nila, hindi ko talaga kakayanin nung team namin and of course we need yung help po ng Philippine National Police and other law enforcement agencies like the NBI and the Bureau of Immigration para po makatulong namin.
Pero Usec, kailangan ba na may abiso sa inyo, may magpadala ng video? Hindi nyo ba pwedeng gawin moto proprio on your own na lusubin na yung mga yan? Dahil halos lahat naman yan talagang tainted with illegality Halos lahat yan tainted with crime
Yes, sir. Actually, sir, mga a week ago, sir, nag-meeting na po kami with PAGCOR and the ING on how we will approach, sir, yung problem natin. Kasi kailangan mo talaga involve na natin yung mga local natin, local LGUs and the local police. Since alam naman po talaga nila kung saan po yan, at yung mga areas, yung operation po nila, alam po nila eh. And siguro ang gagawin na lang po ng PAOCC and the other national agencies is to assist them and monitor kung talagang tatrabahuin nila kasi siyempre mamaya hahausawin lang po yan, magagagawa lang sila ng report na in-inspection nila tapos negative nila. Papakita lang po namin sa kanila na may mga dossier na po kaming alam dyan, may mga intel reports na po kaming ginawa dyan, and we will provide them all the detailed report, intel report, para kung magamit nila if they will be conducting a police operation laban po dun sa mga illegal POGOs. Kasi yun nga ang sinabi namin at nasabi ko na kay Executive Secretary Lucas Bersamin na kailangan magtulungan po talaga yung national and the local government para po ma-stop na po natin ito. Especially yung 300 na yun. Imagine 300 na tama yung sinabi mo, Sir Ronald, na may mga kalokohan sa loob. So, kailangan talaga i-stop na natin to. Stop na nila.
Usec, balikan ko lang itong sinabi mo na mga names na quote-unquote familiar sa ating pandinig. Pag sinabi mong familiar sa ating pandinig, Usec, dalawa lang naman ito, mga artista o politiko. Siguro ganun. Ano pong complicity nila? Ano pong sabit nila? Protector? Artista nga ba o politiko? Mga pangalan na ito.
Siguro sir, ilabas ko na lang po pag na-file na natin yung kaso.
Yeah.
Basta nakikita na po natin at siguro lumulutang na ho yung mga pangalan ito even before. Opo.
So maraming sasabit dito, hindi lang mga Chinese nationals, pati yung mga protector nito na Pilipino. Hindi naman po actually protector, but those whose names appear doon po sa mga documents na recover natin.
May involvement.
Opo, tama po. Especially sir yung sa mga SEC nila, yung mga organizational setup po nila, nandoon po yung mga pangalan nila, di ba? So makikita po natin.
This doesn't mean na criminally liable sila, Usec. Ang sinasabi niyo lang kahit papaano may naging papel sila para magkaroon ng o matayo o mabuo itong POGO complex nito sa PORAC. Parang ganun po ba?
Yes sir, ang pinag-uusapan po kasi natin dito is human trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a criminal act. And siyempre yung kasalanan po ng isa, dahil kasama po silang nagtayo niyan, kasalanan mo talaga ng lahat yan. So, siguro yung charges po, kung ipapile namin charges dun sa iba, yun din po magiging kaso nitong mga sinasabi po natin.
So, Patrick, mukhang hindi lang nila i-announce, kakasuhan nila.
Yes.
Di ba? Itong mga familiar names na ito.
Oo. At saka ayaw lang sabihin mo na ni Usec ngayon. He's being very prudent and very careful. Okay. I guess, Usec, naintindihan nyo naman kung bakit medyo kinukulit ka namin para baka madulas ka at mamaya masabi ng mga ilang pangalan.
Okay lang po, sir. Okay lang po.
Pero magaling si Usec. Alam niya umiwas.
Siyempre.
Umiwas. Geron, may tanong ka pa?
Hindi, okay na yan.
Okay, maraming salamat. Usec Undersecretary Gilbert Cruz of the Presidential Anti-Organized Crime Commission.
Salamat, Usec.
Thank you po, sir. Sir Ronald and Patrick. Thank you po.
Okay, you're watching Storycon on One News. We just need to take a quick break, but we will be right back. This is the Story Conference Group or the Storycon Group. We've got the developing news and the stories behind the headlines. Welcome back to Storycon, the Story Conference. I'm Patrick Paez with political pundit Ronald Llamas. Okay, China has begun the implementation of its so-called no trespassing policy in the South China Sea. That coincides with live fire exercises between Filipino and American troops now being held up north. The details from News 5 correspondent Brian Castillo.
Sunod-sunod na putok ng kanyon na maririnig sa dalampasigan ng Burgos, Ilocos Norte. Para yan sa kunwaring kalaban sa laot na paparating na sa baybayin. Bahagi ito ng Marine Aviation Support Activity o MASA 2024 sa pagitan ng Philippine at United States Marine Corps. Sinanay silang gumamit ng 105 at 155 mm howitzers sa counter-landing exercise kung saan dapat mapigilan ang mga kalabang nagtatangkang lumusob.
Counter landing means we need to prevent them from landing in our beaches. So we use our artillery to prevent these landings. The target took the form of an amphibious ship trying to go inward to our beaches.
Nagsilbing target sa live fire exercise ang ilang bangkang palutang-lutang sa dagat. Kita naman ang bilis ng kilos ng mga sundalo mula sa pag-asinta, pagkakarga ng mga bala, pagpapasabog ng kanyon at hanggang sa pag-reload. Ayon sa Philippine Marines, malinaw ang mensahe ng kanilang mga pagsasanay na hindi sila kailanman papayag na makubkob ng kahit na sinong mananakop ang alinmang bahagi ng ating teritoryo. Bagamat may US Marines, ang naging papel lang muna nila ay manood o observers. Ito ay para makita kung may natutuhan ang mga sundalong Pilipino mula sa mga nagdaang training.
As your Marines, territorial defense is supposedly our number one task. It so happened that for the past how many decades, your Marines have been in the South doing the counterinsurgency, doing the counterterrorism.
Dahil sa pagsasanay, nagpatupad ng no-sail zone sa dagat na sakop ng mga bayan ng Burgos at Pasukin sa Ilocos Norte. Bilang tulong sa mga apektado mangingisda na isang araw hindi makakapalaot, nagpaabot ng food packs ng LGU. Paglilinaw naman ng Marines sa ginagawang pagsasanay, paghahanda lang ito sa anumang sitwasyon, lalo't malapit ang teritoryo sa Taiwan.
We are not even thinking of China whenever we do exercises or trainings. We are preparing for any eventualities that may arise. You can say it. It's the distance, di ba? Malapit lang yung Taiwan, and we need to prepare for it. Not necessarily to join the fight.
Siyempre nitong Sabado, itinuloy na ng China ang pagpapatupad ng no trespassing rule sa West Philippine Sea. Huhulihin daw ng China ang mga dayuhang trespasser sa kanilang teritoryo at ikukulong ng hanggang 60 araw ng walang paglilitis. Kaya nakaposisyon na ang mga barko ng China Coast Guard sa Huangyan Dao sa South China Sea na kilala rin sa tawag na Scarborough Shoal o Baho de Masinloc. Nanindigan naman ng Philippine Air Force na magpapatuloy ang ginagawa nilang pagmumonitor sa ating teritoryo.
We're guarding and protecting our airspace to include our territorial waters and our exclusive economic zones. So magpapatuloy po ang pagpapatrolya ng ating Philippine Air Force pag kinakailangan.
Una na rin kinunda na ni Pangulong Bongbong Marcos ang bagong utos na ito ng China. Para sa kanya, ito ay completely unacceptable. Para sa 1PH, Brian Castillo, News 5.
Now weighing in on these developments in the West Philippine Sea, Geopolitical Analyst Richard Heydarian. Welcome back to the Storycon, Richard.
How are you guys?
Yeah. Okay, so Ronald, Richard, joint exercises, they're firing real artillery outside of Balikatan. I mean, is this unusual or?
Ang medyo unusual yung pag-amin nung nagsasalita kanina na military officer na this is more in relation sa Taiwan. Anong ibig sabihin nun, Richard? Yung nagsalita kanina na itong live exercises na ito ay mas in preparation for Taiwan. Hindi niya in-specify anong ibig sabihin nun.
Well, I think since last year pa lang nakikita natin na different officials sa AFP, no, including some of them that who we interviewed on our show dyan sa One News View from Manila, admitted na the Taiwan question is increasingly relevant sa Pilipinas. At of course, dun sa Balikatan exercises, nakita natin na may mga there were drills. Now, obviously, what they had in mind is potentially China occupying some of our Batanes Islands in an event of war over Taiwan, no? So I think ang nangyayari lang dito is mas nahihirapan ang ating sandatahang lakas para ma-deny na ang Pilipinas ngayon ay increasingly involved na dito sa tinatawag na integrated deterrence strategy kung saan ang Amerika at kanyang mga aliado kasama dyan ang mga Hapon, mga Pilipino, potentially also Australians and South Koreans down the road if ever talaga itong China ay susugod dyan sa Taiwan. So I think this is where the relevance of that comes in. There was also another confirmation by the Japanese embassy na nagkaroon din tayo ng an alternative quadrilateral drills ng Canada, Philippines, Japan, and the United States. So padami at padami itong mga joint drills and exercises natin. At ito ay may kinalaman hindi lang sa Taiwan, obviously, pero pati dito sa issue sa West Philippine Sea kung saan mainit-init din ang panahon.
Pero Richard, for a long while ay hindi inaamin ng ating gobyerno na yung kanilang mga military exercises, joint military exercises, at katulad nitong military drills sa Ilocos, ay may kinalaman sa Taiwan. Parang ngayon ko lang narinig na inamin nila that this has a relationship do sa Taiwan issue. Dahil for a long while, ang focus ng kanilang paliwanag, West Philippine Sea at saka yung freedom of navigation.
Baka nadulas. Kasi sabi ng di ba, China is not in our mind. We're not thinking of China.
Yeah.
But nadulas dun sa part na Taiwan.
Kaya nagulat ako eh.
Well, actually, last year, bago pumunta si Pangulong Bongbong Marcos dyan sa Amerika, dun sa official visit niya, dun sa May last year, may mga spokesman ng ating sandatahang lakas na nagsabi na the EDCA bases sa north of the Philippines could be used for contingency purposes. At obviously, ang reference point nun is potential contingencies sa Taiwan dahil malapit sila sa Taiwan. At least yun yung orientation nila kumpara sa ibang EDCA bases at mga pasilidad kung saan may access ang mga Amerikano. So, what we're seeing here is, parang creeping admission, if I can put it that way, or creeping honesty on the orientation of the Philippine foreign policy. On the part of the Chinese also, hindi na nila sineseparate yung Taiwan issue from the South China Sea issue. Isang integrated theater na rin tingin nila sa issue na yan. At kaya kung titingnan mo yung ibang mga barko ng China, including mga Coast Guard vessels nila, yung mga iba na active lang dyan sa Taiwan Straits, ngayon ay pumupunta na rin sa West Philippine Sea. So now we have a situation of complete entwinement of the South China Sea disputes, and Taiwan at Pilipinas ay nasa gitna ng ganitong usapin, strategic discussions na yan.
Richard, I wonder if should we be okay with that?
At saka,
No,
Richard,
we have to have really debate with that issue kasi Patrick, this is not only an issue of strategy, it's also an issue of tactics in a sense that to what degree yung drills, types of weapon systems the Americans should put it. So I just came from New Zealand, 1 week talks in there. Doon naman ang concern nila is AUKUS. Kung dapat sasamang New Zealand sa Australia, US, UK. At yung sinasabi ng ibang tao from across the political spectrum dyan, whether conservative or progressive, sabi na, kailangan pag-usapan natin na mabuti to. Hindi pwede na umasa lang tayo sa gobyerno to make the final positive judgment. Kasi ang laki na implications sa kanila if sumali sila sa AUKUS kasi masisira din ang relasyon nila sa China, and that also could make them more or less, baka potentially they could be also a lackey of bigger powers of US and Australia. So if mga New Zealand na medyo progressive at developed country, medyo may ganong concern, I think we in the Philippines should also have some serious discussion about how much we want to get involved in the Taiwan question without undermining our strategic autonomy and national independence.
But isn't it also an issue of a constitutional issue? Dahil malinaw sa ating constitution, we denounce war as an instrument of foreign policy. At yung Taiwan issue is bordering on that issue. It's an issue of war. Whether aatakihin yung Taiwan o Pilipinas. Iba kasi yung aatakihin ng Pilipinas eh. Iba yung aatakihin yung Taiwan, no? At yung sinasabi mo kanina, Richard, na yung EDCA is a contingency basis, no, para sa mga Amerikano. What does that mean? Ano ibig sabihin ng contingency? Will it be used in a war over Taiwan? Yung mga ibig sabihin nun? Or is it basically defensive?
First of all, I doubt, Ronald, that there'll be any preemptive strike by the US or anyone against China on the Taiwan issue. Although, interestingly, President Xi Jinping, according to a Financial Times report, was kind of saying that dun sa trip niya sa Europe kung saan inakusan niya yung America of trying to provoke a potential conflict there or drag China into the issue. But obviously, anyone with a serious mind would not take that as seriously. But that's the discussion the Chinese side or pro-Chinese elements are trying to put forward na provocateur dito ang America. But last time I checked, actually, it's Taiwan which is being threatened, and America is, of course, committed to the defense of Taiwan, although that could potentially also undermine their own One China policy. And there's a big debate about parameters of Taiwan-US Relations Act 1979. Pagdating sa Pilipinas, wag natin kalimutan, meron tayong mutual defense treaty with the United States. So all the time, ang sinasabi natin is, tutulungan ba tayo ng mga Amerikano sa West Philippine Sea? Well, it cuts both ways. If we want the Americans to be more helpful to us on the West Philippine Sea issue, then the Americans would naturally expect us to help them kung, if ever, magkakaroon ng giyera dyan sa Taiwan. No? So in that sense, this is within the parameters of the Mutual Defense Treaty. And last time I checked, there's no constitutional ruling that the Mutual Defense Treaty would violate the Philippine foreign policy unless explicitly the U.S. was engaged in an offensive war, sobrang in-your-face na offensive war, which would make it a basis for us to not get involved, to say, no, we have a mutual defense treaty, but it's called mutual defense, not mutual offense treaty. But I think fundamentally this is an issue of deterrence, but this is an issue also of burden sharing. So sasabihin ng mga Hapon, ang mga Amerikana, itong mga Pilipino ay free riders. Gusto lang nila pag tinutulungan namin sila, pero kung kailangan namin tulong nila, ayaw nila tumulong. At the same time, pwede mo rin sabihin, ayaw rin natin maging provocateurs at kumpara sa mga Hapon at Amerikano, napakalimitado yung capabilities natin at medyo bogged down na tayo sa West Philippine Sea. So in short, Patrick, we can have a very lively and interesting debate here. So I don't agree with anyone who wants to shut this down and say, oh, clear-cut yan, all-in tayo, or clear-cut yan, dapat wala tayong sasabihin. I think both sides are wrong. We have to have a healthy debate, just like the Kiwis are having a healthy debate or supposed to have a healthy debate on the AUKUS issue. Ang pinag-usapan dito yung fate, our strategic fate of our nation.
May dalawang different lang dyan, no, issues, Richard. Una, wala naman sa Constitution ng Amerika that they renounce war as an instrument of foreign policy. Tayo, sa atin lang meron. At ikalawa, merong gray areas in terms of one China policy tayo. Well, US din. Pero ang US kasi for more than four decades, strategic ambiguity yung policy nila sa Taiwan. Ngayon lang sila umamin that they will defend Taiwan militarily from invasion. Ngayon lang nangyari yan nung panahon ni Biden, di ba? So, pero tayo, officially, we still have a one China policy. So, medyo gray area yan, di ba? Kahit lusubin ng China ang Taiwan.
Well, gray area din yun sa mga Hapon. More than gray area yan sa mga Australians. And definitely mga Kiwis and New Zealand, yung mga ibang yan. And South Koreans don't want to get involved in this. I think both South Koreans and to a lesser degree, some in Australia have also said now, hindi 100% na madadamay tayo dyan. In Japan naman, obviously, dun sa kanilang constitution, they also renounce war. Di ba? As an instrument of foreign policy. Bawal yun sa saligang batas nila. Nevertheless, as you can see, both in Japan and also in the Philippines, it's a matter of interpretation, right? There's enough loopholes or room for interpretation, whether dun sa ating saligang batas or dyan sa mutual defense treaty natin, to make it relevant dito sa Taiwan question. Again, for me, we have to be careful not to amplify the Chinese propaganda na tayo ang provocateurs. No, they're clearly the one who are threatening Taiwan. And on the part of the US, actually, daming napapaisip what on earth is happening here if Biden really knows what he's talking about. So I think Biden for the 5th time, just few weeks earlier, said na tutulungan na Amerika ang Taiwan kung sakaling susugurin sila ng China. But we know on many occasions, people from the US State Department and different officials in the US reiterated na may one China policy sila and that they don't have a mutual defense treaty with Taiwan. In fact, the US is not even open and transparent about the degree to which it has security cooperation with Taiwan. So this is like 50 shades of gray, right? In the sense that each side has their own legal gray zone and they're trying to see how can they operationalize this in an event of conflict. Kaya grabe yung level of strategic ambiguity to. Kaya sabi ko, ingat talaga tayo sa Pilipinas. Gusto ko tumulong sa Taiwan, obviously. Gusto ko tumulong sa ating mga allies. Para tanggapin din natin, medyo bogged down tayo sa West Philippine Sea at limitado yung capacities natin so far. So we have to tread very, very carefully on this.
Okay. Ang problema lang,
Richard,
Richard,
my question, I'd just like to sneak this question in, because we're talking about gray areas and strategic ambiguity and all that. Where would you, in your opinion, where do you think should the Philippines draw the line?
Well, definitely pagdating sa burden sharing on the Taiwan question or anything of that matter, dapat any burden that we share should be proportionate dun sa capacity natin. So obviously, we're the weaklings on many fronts and we still need to build up our own capability. So instead of being a 30-30-30 splits, for instance, among Japan, Philippines, and US, I would say operationally it should be something like 50.
Richard, I guess ang interest ng United States dito is like a real estate. They can't get anything from us in terms of equipment or anything like that or firepower, but their interest here is really real estate, location. So is that good enough?
Well, I
Should
mean,
that be our
yes and no,
30%?
in a sense that, of
Providing them
course,
a base?
yun yung limitation natin historically. But in fairness, wag natin i-underestimate din yung Philippine Armed Forces of the Philippines. All of these balikan exercises are not just to show na mga Amerikano may mga big nice toys. The AFP is also absorbing the capacity to operate increasingly sophisticated weapon systems, and we're about to spend $36 billion over the next 10 years.
So we all
on our
agree
commitment.
that the AFP
So,
is
hindi naman tayo ng real estate or rentier lang. But unfortunately, that has been the case, of course, in the past.
so it will have necessarily involve real estate, land.
You know, it could be rescue
Locating the bases.
operation, it could be backup operations. For instance, sabi natin, okay, let me just spell it out. If you look at the war games, there is a potential for thousands of Americans getting injured or killed dyan sa southern portions of Taiwan if ever there's a war. So an expectation is the Filipinos could come, save some of, I don't know, drowning soldiers, injured soldiers, retrieve some of the bodies. So it may not necessarily be Philippines directly involved in combat operations, but Philippines providing logistical support, R&R support, and all sorts of other kind of backup support. So of course, the U.S. also has an interest for the Philippines to have some minimal capability to project power and be helpful to us. Hindi yung meron lang tayo keys to the EDCA bases. And the reason I'm saying this is because I don't think there'll be a war until the next 5 years. Of course, anything can happen, but probability-wise, I doubt there'll be a war in the next 5 years.
Why 5 years? I'm curious, Richard. Why 5 years?
From now.
Why 5 years? I'm curious.
Because China is still
Preparing?
a decade
Is that
a decade behind the Americans, no?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, Xi Jinping said that 2027 they have to be prepared, meaning they have to have to be in a position whereby may laban sila, may chance sila to succeed. That's totally different from saying we should invade Taiwan by 2027. And it's not like nakatungangan lang yung kabila. As we speak, the Americans are looking at developing counter-missile defense systems. So they're thinking of putting more missile defense system in Japan. Japan also developing its own missile defense system. The Taiwanese are improving their missile defense system. So I think one area which is going to be very relevant to us, Patrick and Ronald, in the coming years is, papayag ba tayo ng mga Amerikano maglalagay ng maraming missile defense systems sa atin? Of course, technically, they're missile defense systems, meaning they'll be used for defensive capability. But China will not interpret it that way. China will see it as a way whereby U.S. will neutralize China's ability to strike at American warships. So you can see how this can get very high level, high stakes, and very operational. And that's why I'm saying, Patrick and Ronald, we have to have some transparency, have proper debate. Ang ayoko mangyari is sinishut down yung debate. Or sasabihin na provocateur lang tayo, or sasabihin nila natuta lang tayo na Amerika. I think those two are caricatures of what's happening. And this is an unprecedented situation. We have never been in this kind of situation. China is a superpower like nothing we have ever seen. And the U.S. is still a power to reckon with. And Japan and others are also coming in. At salamat sa ating geography, we are the very, very front line. Frontline to Taiwan, frontline to South China Sea, first island chain. So these are tough times for the Philippines. So we have to step it up. So I'm glad we're having these kinds of conversation because as I talk, I'm also thinking of all different scenarios whereby the Philippines could be over-involved or under-involved. So in short, we have to find that Goldilocks level of alliance whereby we're helpful enough to the Americans para hindi tayo useless, para may makuha rin tayo sa kanila when we need their help, but not overdo it. We have to make sure it's proportionate to our capacity and doesn't undermine our strategic autonomy. Now, whether I'm confident that the Marcos administration can execute this perfectly, obviously, I'm not in a position to perfectly vouch for them. Baka si Sir Ronald pwede mag-vouch for them.
In relation to that, Richard, tingin mo another elephant in the room. Will the November election alter these dynamics? Halimbawa, just in case manalo si Trump, will there be changes dun sa statement ni Biden that they will defend Taiwan militarily? Will a Trump presidency admit that or openly claim that they will defend Taiwan militarily? Dahil nung presidente siya, wala siyang sinasabi tungkol dyan.
Well, as we speak, the Biden administration is trying to quote-unquote Trump-proof its alliances in the region, whether ito yung JAFUS, Japan, Philippine, US, whether ito yung new Squad. We can have a debate about whether you can really Trump-proof these things because at the end of the day, Donald Trump is Donald Trump and he has his own mind. At the same time, if you talk to people who, and some of them we have interviewed, who could be in positions, very senior positions, whether national security advisors or number 2 or number 3, if not number 1 in the State Department of Defense, Pentagon of the US, they are the China first thinking kind of people, meaning China talaga yung number 1 threat. So honestly, kung ikaw ay Ukraine, ikaw mag-worry. once Trump comes into power. Because the Trump administration, whether he's stopped strategists or himself, have made it clear they're not interested in helping Ukraine the way America has been doing for the past decades or so. So in theory, I think we have less to worry than, let's say, Ukrainians. But at the same time, for me, from what we saw in Trump 1.0, is that he also has a tendency of insinuating himself into wars potentially in the Middle East. So actually, ang fear ko dito is Trump might pick a war in the Middle East at the expense of his ability to help us effectively, whether on the Taiwan question or the South China Sea issue. So more of, yun kind of medyo sabog accident, yun ang mas worry ko, rather than principled focus.
Can it be any more, Richard, can it be any more sabog than what it is right now?
Oh, it's a bottomless iced tea, I'm telling you. I think people are not realizing things can keep on getting worse. I mean, we saw the withdrawal of US from Afghanistan, the horrible, yung sobrang all over the place, and we thought this is it. Biden cannot do anything worse than that. And then now we look at the latest round of conflict. So let me tell you what, we should have no illusions about either US or China acting as extremely reckless or irresponsible in the coming decades. Welcome to the 21st century. Kaya dapat tayo, mga mas maliliit na bansa, whether ito ay Philippines,
you just explained.
We have to work together.
You just explained in detail or in a brief, yung pagkikisabog ng United States. I mean, is it then in our national interest that we go deep with them in this?
Well, I mean, let's still not forget that ang primary concern natin is China. The threat is coming from China, not from the United States. But you're correct to say that medyo we have to calibrate also in a sense that if the US turns out as completely unreliable under Trump, meaning domestic politics is all over the place, more legal cases, picking fights right and left, then yes, we have to have red lines. Kaya nga sabi ko, parating ang pinag-usapan ng mga ibang expert dyan is yung tinatawag na de-risk. Diba? Yung minimize exposure, risk exposure sa China. Sabi ko, kailangan din natin ng de-risk pag si Trump ang manalo. Not to mention, baka kay Biden din. I mean, he's gonna be quite old if he goes into another term. So, we need to have also our red lines and the risk when we deal with the Americans. And that's why, and guess what? Mga Hapon, ganun din yung mga conversations behind the scenes. Mga Australians, ganun din. Definitely mga Europeo. The Europeans will have a big headache and problem with Donald Trump should he come back to power. So kaya nga, we have to laterally also talk to other countries na alay ng US, ayaw sa China, pero ayaw rin nila madamay doon sa mga excesses, imperial excesses of any of these two superpowers. Again, I understand my position is quite nuanced in the sense that it doesn't fit into any of the camp. But honestly, I think this is how we should have conversation about these issues.
Okay, maraming salamat, Geopolitical Analyst Richard Heydarian.
Magaling ka pa rin, Richard. Akala ko, tinalo ka na ng supranational, yung supranational awardee natin, na magaling daw sa geopolitics.
Ayun na naman tayo.
Kaya sinama sa Ukraine, sa
Poland. No? Dahil mas magaling kesa kay Richard sa geopolitics. Si Mr. Supranational. No?
Okay.
Guys.
So ulitin, Richard Heydarian. Okay, maraming salamat.
Richard.
Okay, thanks for joining the Storycon today. Ronald Llamas, our resident political pundit. Join us again tomorrow at 4 p.m. for the Storycon. I'm Patrick Paez. We are One News, all sides, all the time. This is the Story Conference Group or the Storycon Group.